So we've just kicked off the recording. It's week 7. Apologies for those that were looking forward to a boring session with me with reports. I changed the order through accident more than intent. Harrison's though stepping up and doing the security and permissions for us in this session. Just going through the exam topics, configuration and setup. We'll go through, or Harrison will go through a lot more of the practical examples. There's things that you will be able to memorize specifically around security controls, such as IP ranges and logging certain hours and things like that. They're the standard kind of exam questions that if you're exposed to it, you can kind of understand. There are, so there are a couple more regarding the scenario based, so that there's two, given a scenario, you're given a user request scenario, given a scenario. So Harrison's focus is going to be a lot more on the practical. So without further ado, just quickly with these topics and links, Who Sees What series, everybody should watch that at least once. It's the standard location that even Salesforce recommend for as soon as you start talking about security, you watch that Who Watches What series. I don't think it's been changed much in many years. There's a couple of trailhead modules, and there's a security super badge. That super badge is one of the trickier super badges because it doesn't have as much description in it. It's a very short one with the scenario that you're using. Really good for hands-on.
And also, it kind of reinforces the idea that there's actually many ways you can achieve something in Salesforce, but there's only one best way. So, and that's very much the case with security and sharing and so on. There's many ways you can give a user access to the records that they need access to, but you need to do it in such a way that is consistent with the way you want to be sharing your data across the organization.
So with that, a nice segue, mate. Do you want to take control? You can.
Yep. So hopefully you can see my screen. So this is just a really quick slide thing I did. Obviously that's the title. Kel's kind of already gone over this stuff, so I'll just go on to the next one. And so when we're talking about user access, sharing settings and security in Salesforce, what we really are talking about is user access. And there are a number of different areas and tools that Salesforce gives you to manage user access. So in the top left, we've got a user's profile, and another version of the user's profile are permission sets, which I'll go to. That's what a user can do and which objects and fields a user can see and edit. What settings are allowed on a given profile are also based on the user's license type. So if they have a limited license, they might not be able to do all of the features that the profile has the ability to do. So the profile is really it's not just what fields and objects a user can see, but it's also what other additional functionality a user can do. Like, can they send emails? Can they send bulk emails? Are they allowed to configure org settings? Are they allowed to access Apex? Are they allowed to access a whole variety of other Salesforce features? Another area is the roles and territories. I won't be going through territories so much, but just know that they are similar to roles, but they are more flexible and they have more complex use cases. And for the admin exam, you don't need to know about territories, but just know that territory management is a more complex version, sophisticated version of role hierarchies. So I'll generally just be talking about roles in this session. Based on a hierarchy, which record can a user see and edit based off their subordinates' access to the same records? And then the underlying functionality that you start with in the whole process of determining what a user can do, can't do, see, so on, are the org-wide sharing settings. And these are really what's the base level of access? Sorry, Robin, can you stop moving your camera about? It's feel like I'm spinning around. Got peripheral vision. The org-wide sharing settings are what are the base level access that every user in your org can do, both their internal and external users. And that's the way access works in Salesforce. Is the general best practice is nobody has any access, and then you slowly, through the various tools that you're provided, increase the layers of which a person can do or see or something, etc. So I'll go through that and show you what that looks like. But generally speaking, you start with sharing settings, then you go to profile, and then you put a user in a role to give people the ability to then see and do what they need to be able to do in Salesforce. So I'm going to go through each of these areas in the org, because I think hands-on is the best way of learning where things are and what things mean. And then I'll go through some examples, because I've got two users in this org, an admin user who can see and do effectively everything. And then I have another user that is just using the standard default vanilla permission set / profile. And I'll show you what that looks like between the two people. So just know it's the same org. Everyone has the same fields, visibility, and so on. And then, yeah, we'll go from there. So Salesforce, as an admin, when you're looking for where security is, let's start with org-wide sharing settings, because again, that's the baseline. So you just go to your setup, go home, search for sharing settings. And in here, it gives you a big long list of all of the objects in your org. The default internal access, so those are for your full Salesforce users. Default external access, so these are for your community licenses and site guest users. And then you have grant access using hierarchies. And then you can see that there's a big long list of all of the objects in your org, both standard objects and custom objects. And then there are some other settings down there, but we'll get to that. So by default, in this org that we've got, by default, internal users, all of them can publicly read, write, and change the ownership of a record by default. Whereas by default, external users can only see records that they own. And that's a key concept in Salesforce, is this idea of record ownership. It's where a user is responsibility for the data on that record, and they're the ones responsible for interacting with the person in the case of it being a contact record or an account record, or in the situation where it's a task and so on. This idea of record ownership is a key area of how Salesforce gives people the permission to see and do things at a record level. So, however, if the default internal access is public read write and all other things allow it, this means that every user in a Salesforce org will be able to see all of the records on that object, edit all of the records on that object, and transfer all of the records on that object from one to another. However, you can see if we go to the account and contract object, it is set to private, which means that only people who own that record will be able to see it, all other things being ignored. And then we look at the contact object, and you see another value, which is controlled by parent. So for objects that have a master detail relationship, and if you can remember all the way back to the previous session that I ran where I went over how to create objects and fields, I went over what a master detail relationship is. For objects that have a master detail relationship, their record visibility is controlled by the parent's record. So in this case, if a user can see an account, like let's say they own the account, it means that they will be able to see and edit all of the related contact records that are related to that account. So that's how that hierarchy works. If I was to go edit here to change these settings, On the standard object, I can change that. See, it says controlled by parent, so I can then change it. And if I didn't want that to be the case, I could change it to private or public read write, etc. So if I didn't want a person who owned an account to be able to necessarily see all of the contacts, I could change this setting to private, and then they wouldn't by default be able to see it. And that has its use cases. For not-for-profits, typically, most not-for-profits, in my experience, allow all of their internal users to at least see all the contacts and the accounts in the org, but it becomes more of a custom objects or more like classified or need to know information is stored separately on a different object, and then that record is limited. But definitely, if your org has made data sharing commitments as policy, then you will definitely need to be changing these org-wide settings to meet that, and then only giving people need to know access. So you can see here there's all of the objects and all of these settings can be changed. Typically, if you want to be super secure, you would typically go private, but again, it really depends on what your data settings are. If you're at an org level, you've agreed that all Salesforce users should be able to see all contacts and edit all contacts, and that's a decision you make as an organization, then having public read write is perfectly fine. If we go to other settings here, we can see that there are manager groups. There are a variety of other settings. So I'll go back to edit because you'll see that there are actually more. And you can see here that we've got manual user record sharing, manager groups, and then require permission to view record names and lookup fields. I don't typically like to check that value because it can make people very confused, because it means that if there's a relationship field on an object and the user has access to the record, but they don't have access to the related record, then nothing shows up in that, and it can be a bit confusing. So unless you have very specific requirements around people being able to see related records or not, I typically wouldn't use that setting. Manager groups and manual user record sharings effectively allows a record owner to share that record manually with another user or another group of their choice. So I'm going to select these because we're going to come back to these, to the manual user record sharing later. But effectively, if that's enabled, it means if I own an account and then Steve needs access to that account because he needs to follow up with them for something and he doesn't have access at the moment, I can manually go in, share this account with Steve so he can then see the account and any related records that provide him that access. So I'm just going to enable that now and go save. So now if I go down here, we've got sharing rules. Let's say hypothetically that I don't want anyone to see any accounts unless they own them, and I don't want anyone to see any contacts unless they own them. I can then create sharing rules. And what sharing rules are effectively a way of being able to share records in more custom ways than just do you own them or not. Because, you know, while there might be an account owner, there might be 5 other people who need access to that account. So if we go down here, I'll just refresh the page, you can then see I can create sharing rules here. And what I would do on the account, let's say, I would say, I could do it based off the record owner. So I could share this account with all of their managers or some other people who are related to the record owner. So that's based off who owns the account. Or I could do it based off the account's records criteria, which is a fairly common use case. And I could say if the account is active equals true, or yes, then I want to share with public groups all internal users and read only. But I could also give additional related records additional access. So what this does is effectively, if I have private set on my account, which I do, so only I can see the accounts I own, I've now created an additional sharing rule that if an account is classified as active, it's also being shared with all other internal users in this org at a read-only level. And that means that they will be able to see the account. They won't be able to edit it, but they'll at least be able to see any account that is active. And this is the case for almost all other Salesforce objects. There are a few limited ones like price books, I believe, and a few others, but most standard objects and all custom objects can be additionally shared in that way. So this is the overview of what the baseline sharing control you have in Salesforce, your sharing settings, your org-wide defaults. So now we're going to move on to the next thing, and we're going to move on to profiles. So the first thing I would recommend you do when you're looking at profiles is go to your, or even before you look at your profiles, is go to user management settings and enable enhanced profile list views and the enhanced profile user interface. And there is another one, enhanced permission set component views as well. So effectively, because Salesforce has been around a long time, their more traditional way of looking at permissions is a bit clunky because there's just so much there now. So they've created these new views. You can do the exact same things with the views, it's just the data's displayed differently. And I find it's much more clear where to go and what to do when you enable these views. So first, I'm going to look at the users in my org. So the chatter expert user, user integration, and user security, they are default Salesforce users that you'll always have in your org regardless. So effectively, you can ignore them. Salesforce uses them for stuff, and there's not really any reason for you to be changing their permissions or granting them additional permissions and so on. And they don't have full Salesforce licenses either, so you don't need to worry about them counting towards your record count. So I've got Jane Blogs in here, and I've got myself. And I'm a system, my profile is a system administrator, and Jane Blog's profile is a standard user. So profiles are, again, what permissions I have and what I'm allowed to do. You'll note that the column role is currently empty. So no one in this org currently has a role. And we'll get to roles and hierarchies a bit later, but for now, just note that standard user, Jane Blogs, and system administrator, myself. So if we actually go to a profile, because this is a test org, it comes with a lot more profiles by default. I would strongly recommend, if you are going to go into developing custom security profile, custom profiles for your users, use a custom profile. Start from scratch, go object by object, field by field, setting by setting to know, does this person need access to this field? What level of access do they need? Read, write, and so on. So if I go to the system administrator profile, I'm then greeted with a screen of, these are all of the different areas that I can give myself or remove permissions from. So typically the most commonly used ones are object settings. So these are all of which objects I can see, what is my default object, what fields on an object can I see, what fields on an object can I edit. And then under the system, I've got system permissions. So these are more broad scale platform capabilities that you do or don't have access to. Things like, can you do list views? Can you send emails? Does my password ever expire? I would strongly recommend against using that permission. And then there are a whole variety of other things as well, things like flow access, visual force page access. These are particularly important if you're doing things with communities. You need to give users who use a community access to specific code and capabilities. And then there's a variety of other things as well, like session settings, password policies, and so on. If you want to have certain user profiles have very strict password, formatting, or where they can log in as well. If you only want users with a certain profile only logging in at your business's IP address, then you can set that there. But then if there's someone else who needs to be able to log in wherever they are on their phone, etc., you can also then give them a different profile with a different login session range. And in a similar way, in a similar way to profiles as well. So I'll just click into these so you can just have a quick look at what they are. You can see that there's lots of information at a very, very granular level on all of the objects. For accounts, you can see I've got, as an system administrator, I've got default read access, create, edit, delete. If the highlighted area wasn't there, I wouldn't be able to see any accounts that I didn't own, but I've overwritten the default sharing settings of private to say I can view all records regardless of if I own them. I can modify or edit all records regardless of if I own them. I can then also view setup, edit setup, and delete setup, which are additional permissions. So you can see here how you can set all of your defaults org-wide sharing settings in the other area that I was on earlier to private, but then still share and give users access to view or edit all of the records using this permission set. So this is what I mean by Salesforce allows you multiple ways of actually achieving an outcome. So if you did by default want to have everyone only seeing the records that they could own, but then at a profile level, or as I'm about to go into at a permission set level, allow certain users to see or edit everything, you can do so here. Here is also fairly important. You can also control what record types a user has access to and see, and also what is their default record type. So when they create a opportunity, for example, you can say by default, the opportunity they create is this one. And that goes into record types, which is also something we covered in my last session. So similar to profiles, permission sets, they look identical in terms of their layout, if we look at them. And permission sets, I'll just create a new one so it actually looks more similar. And permission sets are effectively profiles, mini profiles, effectively. So they have a subset of permissions that are very, very specific that you can apply on top of someone's default profile. So let's say you had a sales manager who needed to do something extra and additional at a user level that other sales managers didn't need to do. One way you could achieve that is by creating a permission set and then adding the additional permissions that they require to do, and then only applying it to them at a user level, not applying it across the board to a profile. So in a similar way to org-wide settings are the defaults for all users, profiles are kind of the defaults for a subset of users, and then permission sets can be used to then fill in the gaps of functionality that's required for specific individuals who are using your Salesforce platform. So a user can be assigned only one profile, but they can be assigned many permission sets. And then if we look here, there's also this thing called permission set groups, and that's literally just if you want to group a bundle of permission sets and then only have to apply that group to a user instead of having to go and click all, if you had a number of installed packages as well, they often come with permission sets that you have to apply to users. So you could create a group of, this person needs to have the access to the DocGen tool, the SMS messaging tool. They need to be able to access Campaign Monitor and do all of these other things. I'll just group them all into a permission set group, and then I only need to assign that one group to the new users who are onboarding, instead of having to remember, what are the 16 permission sets that I need to assign every single time I have a new user. So that's just a quality of life thing, a permission set group. Yeah, so you can just create a new permission group set, and then you just add permission sets to it. As you can see here, permission sets in group, and then you can manage assignments by adding and removing users. So that's at a high level what profiles are and permission sets. They are very similar in that way. Let's go on to roles now. So roles are not necessarily your organization structure. They're not really designed for that. And a lot of organizations don't have very, very structured like very, very hierarchical structures. Often of the time, you have one person doing multiple roles. So the way you should really think about the role hierarchy in Salesforce is more, who are they reporting to at a high level? Who above them in the organization needs to be across everything that their subordinate is doing? So often it's similar to an organization structure, but it's not necessarily the same thing. So you can see here in this example role structure, we've got 221, which is the Salesforce org. You then have the CEO and then the executive, and then underneath the executive, you have then subcategories. These are just default, so you don't need to be too worried about like having a hyper complex role hierarchy. Again, it just depends on what you need. And the general rule is if you have a user in the marketing team and then a user whose role is VP of marketing, that user at the high level will be able to see all the records that the user below them can see. However, remember that there was a checkbox in the org-wide sharing settings earlier that said grant access using hierarchies. If you untick that, then that sharing won't occur. So even if they are, even if a subordinate has access to records, but that setting hasn't been enabled, then the person in the role above them won't be able to access those records. So again, Salesforce still gives you the option to remove that role-based sharing, that hierarchical-based sharing. Just, you know, for let's say you wanted client confidentiality between a case manager and a client, and you don't want that case manager's manager to know exactly what the contents of their conversations are. That's an example where you wouldn't be granting access versus via hierarchies. It should be noted though, if a user, so such as a system administrator, has view all access on the object, they will still be able to see all of those records. So it's always something to keep in mind. And then at a high level, that's effectively what a role hierarchy is. You can just add roles quite easily anywhere. You just click add, you label it. You can say what level of access the related records would have, so opportunity and case, who the role reports to, the role name, and if you wanted the role name to be different for reporting, let's just say for clarity in your reports, you can then have an alternative name here, and then you just save. One thing to note is if you have an organization with a very large number of records, and by very large number, I mean hundreds of thousands plus on a given object, it can take a while for sharing settings to change and recalculate. So if you are making changes to the org structure, it's generally best to do it when there aren't lots of users using your system, because the system can experience slowdown and there can be glitches and so on. And by glitches, I don't mean literally glitches. I mean, people can experience unintended behavior. So if you are making sharing changes at a high level when you have a lot of records in your org, just make sure you do it in downtime, like, you know, overnight or something. So that's effectively where you go to change what a person can and can't do in Salesforce. You have those three main areas that manage it. Now I'm going to just show you what that actually looks like in practice. And there is also one other thing I still need to go through, which is report and dashboard sharing, which uses some of the sharing functionality, but not necessarily. It also has its own kind of sharing stuff as well. So I'll go through that there. So as you could see before, we had Jane Bloggs here, and then you've got myself. Now I'm just going to go through both orgs. So you can see the screen on the right is the admin org. The screen on the left is Jane as should be logged in as Jane. I'll just make sure I am. Might not be. Yeah, I am. Okay, Jane. Yeah, there we go. So you can see at the moment, Jane can see all contacts, and I can see all contacts, more or less. There's 3 that I can't see. That's probably because those contacts are owned by accounts that are not active. I'll show you what happens when I change that sharing rule and disable it. So if we go down here, we can see this rule here. Now let's delete that. So it's going to then recalculate. You can see here 1 or more sharing operations has been initiated. In orgs with a large number of records, that can take a while, but in this case, because there are not many records, it should be almost instant. So if I refresh this page on the left, you can see, bam, all of a sudden, all the contacts have magically disappeared. That's because that sharing rule I had before was manually sharing those accounts and then therefore those related subordinate contacts with Jane, even though she doesn't own any of them. If I then go and assign roles to all of us, so let's say I'm going to be, my role in this org shall be the COO. And then if I put Jane as the CEO, so above me in the hierarchy, and then I refresh the page, bam, all of the contacts appear again. Because because 1, we are granting access via hierarchies, and 2, she is superior to me in the role hierarchy. She's above me in the role hierarchy. She's then therefore able to see all the records I can see. Because I'm a system administrator and I can see all the records, she therefore can see all the records. So just keep that in mind. However, if her profile doesn't give her access to an object, she won't be able to see those records, not because she isn't being shared, those records aren't being shared with her, it's because she doesn't have access to the actual object. For example, if I search for surveys, nothing shows up for her. If I search for surveys in here, which is a custom object I created, you can see that surveys does show up because I'm a system administrator. I've given myself access to the survey object. Now, if I go to Jane Doe's profile, I could give her access to the survey object, or I could create a permission set. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to create a survey permission set. And this is going to give her just read access to the object. I'm not going to give her view all to the survey object. So I'm going to scroll down, look for survey S. Yeah, there we go. You can see that she had by default no access to the object. Now let's make it available to her. Yep, available and visible. She can read, create, and edit, and delete, I guess. Yes, she has access to all of these fields. And save. So now I just need to assign this permission set to Jane. If it loads, there we go. Manage assignments. I'm going to add her. There we go. There's Jane, assign. Yep, she's been assigned. Now, if I refresh this page and then search for surveys, surveys now shows up for her. And again, because she's above me in the role hierarchy, even though the permission set only gives read, write, edit access at a record level, it doesn't give view all or modify all, because she's above me in the role hierarchy and I have access to all the records, she therefore has access to all the records. And I can show you if I go and change her role or remove her from the role hierarchy completely. So I'll just remove her now. She doesn't have a role anymore. Then I refresh. All the survey records disappear because she no longer has access to any of them. Okay, so now let's say I wanted her to have access to a very specific record. Let's go to our contacts. So if we go back to contacts here, because she's not in the role hierarchy, she can't see anyone anymore, right? If I go to my contact here, I can then, that one. I can then, there should be a sharing button somewhere. Maybe I forgot to enable. Yeah, I can do that. Oh wait, I need to go to his account, not entity. Okay, maybe it is that. Yeah, there we go. So because of the org structure and the sharing and settings, because contacts sharing were set to be controlled by the parent, I can't share a contact record because its sharing permissions are being controlled by the parent, which is the account. If I changed that from being controlled by parent to private, I would then be able to manually share the contact record. In this case, I need to manually share the account record. You can see here that there's sharing button, and I'm going to manually share this record with our user and search for Jane. I'm going to give her read write, and she can, and that's fine. So now I've manually shared that single record, and then therefore, because of that, also the contact with Jane. If I refresh here, bam, Andy Young now shows up here. Because I've manually shared that individual record. If I look at him and then go to related, you can see the surveys, because surveys are a master detail relationship to the contact. So their sharing is inherited by what access the parent has, what record level access the parent object has, in this case being the contact record. So if I then look at the sharing hierarchy on the right, you can see there's a button here. This gives you a view of all the users that can access this record and why. So what level access they have on the entity. In this case, for some reason it's entity, but that's the account. Just, I don't know why it's been renamed to entity, but whatever. So you've got the account access. I have full access. And if I looked at the user access details, it's because one, I'm the owner, and two, I'm also a system administrator. And because I have those relationships, because I have those reasons, the access levels those provide me is full access. So if I go back to the sharing hierarchy, you can see integration user also has access, probably due to its profile just being read all. And in a similar way, security user also has read only, probably because its profile gives it view all, read only. Reason for access, okay, it's classed as an administrator. Again, you don't need to worry about those users because they're used for Salesforce, so you can kind of ignore them. You can see here though that Jane Bloggs, she has read write access, and the reason for that is manual sharing there, and the manual sharing was read write. So if I go back and go back to our sharing settings, I can then get rid of the manual sharing with Jane and click save. And then if I refresh here, I'm still on the contacts page, refreshing the contact page. All of a sudden, it doesn't exist for her anymore because I've just removed that sharing for her. She can no longer access it. Okay, so now this takes us to the reports and dashboards area of sharing. Reports and dashboards are kind of funny because they respect a user's, reports respect a user's sharing ability and sharing records. So if Jane was to run the contacts with surveys report right now, as you can see I'm running here, she shouldn't be able to see anything. Yeah, there we go. There are no contacts with surveys. Whereas if I run the exact same report, I will be able to see a number of people who have surveys. So there we go. These people have completed their survey thing here. So it's the exact same report, no different other than the fact that Jane doesn't have access to the records, whereas I do. Now, sharing a report so let's just, before we go from the records that are based from a report, let's just go at a report and dashboard level itself. For a user to have access to a report or a dashboard, that report or dashboard has to be shared with them. There are a few ways that report or dashboard can be shared with them. One is the report is saved in the public reports folder, and that's just all users have access to any reports in there. That being said, even if you have access to a report in there, Salesforce still uses your sharing settings. So if you don't have access to any records, the report that is reporting on those records will still say there are none, even if there are lots. And then if we go, another way you can share reports as well is through folders, which I quite like. You obviously have to have permission to actually create and share folders and so on. So if I go to my admin level, my admin account on the right, you can see here there's a button that says new folder. I can create a folder here. Shared reports. There's our shared reports folder. And then I can share this folder. And then I can share this with users. I can share it with people who have certain roles. I can share it with roles and their subordinates, or I could share it with public groups. I haven't really mentioned public groups. They are quite useful, but they're also quite simple. It's literally just a grouping of people that you desire. So a public group can be anyone. I'll just show you that quickly now, just for because they are used fairly often, and I probably should have mentioned it earlier. Public groups, here we go. It's literally just a set of users, and you determine who that set of users is. So one, you can grant access using hierarchies of users within the group. So if you have people with, this is actually quite useful. If you have people who are in two different roles in two completely separate branches of the role hierarchy, if you give them grant access using hierarchies and add them to the same public group, then you'll be able to cross-share all of the records of their subordinates. But in this case, you can see here we've got search users. You can add roles and subordinates, or even other public groups. Again, it's just a way of grouping users in some way. And then you can manually use them to share with later. In a similar way, you can also share list views with public groups and so on. So it's literally just a grouping of users. If we go back to our share reports, in this case, I'm going to share this folder with Jane, and she can view it. I could change it to edit or manage it, so she can actually even edit and manage reports, assuming her profile allows her to do that as well. But in this case, I'm just going to give her view to the reports. So then any reports I save in this folder or any child folders will be shared at a view level for Jane. So she'll be able to see and run all the reports in this folder and any child folders. I'll just create a child folder. Yeah. So anything, if I go into the child folder, any reports in here will also be shared with her, because this child folder inherits the parents folder sharing settings. You'll note that I can't actually change the sharing settings on here, the child folder. You can only set the sharing settings at the parent level of the folders. So child folders can't have different sharing settings to their parent folders. So just keep that in mind. I don't really like that, because I like to have nice, neat folder structures, but you're you have to do it that way. So at the high level, the parent folder is where you set the sharing settings, and then child folders have that. And dashboards are exactly the same thing in terms of when you're sharing what dashboards a user can run and view. It's using the exact same folder structure there. Now, coming to dashboards though, there is actually one difference with dashboards. So if I go here, if I go to a contacts with surveys dashboard I've created, which is using the contacts with surveys reports, right? You'll notice one key difference. So first things first, Jane on the left here can't see the dashboard yet. So let's fix that first. So let's go to the folder that this dashboard is in is shared folder. So let's go and share that with her. Jane logs, view, okay, done. So now that's been shared with her. So you notice how before, even though Jane had been shared let's just wait for it to actually share with her. Maybe I didn't click it correctly. No, I didn't. It's a trap. You have to click share and then wait, and then there we go. If you noticed before, Jane couldn't see any data in the report, right? If I go to this dashboard now though, and look, the shared folder now shows up for her, so she can see it, and then she can see the contacts with surveys. you'll notice that she does actually see data, right? So that's the same thing that I can see here. And so this is a kind of unique thing with dashboards in that you can override your org sharing settings and give users access to effectively summary data that by default their sharing settings wouldn't allow them to see. And the reason for this is the way that the dashboard is being run. You can see here that this dashboard is being run as viewing as Harrison Thomas. So that means that anyone who loads this dashboard, Salesforce will run this dashboard as if it's me who is viewing it. So it's using my sharing settings to view this dashboard, regardless of the actual user doing it. Now, obviously, you can change this because it would be a bit of a concern if you couldn't. I can just change the view the dashboard as. I can do it as another person, so I can specify a different user if I wanted. Let's say you had a fake user called the dashboard user who could just read certain things, and then that's just what you use to share, dashboard level access to it. Or you can change it to do the dashboard viewer, or I could let the dashboard viewers choose whom they see the dashboard as. So that's kind of useful if you have individual people's dashboards, and then you as a system administrator wants to see, okay, what's the views of all of these different users to make sure that they're seeing the right things and so on, and the right numbers are adding up. So I'm going to change this view dashboard as the dashboard viewer and save this dashboard, and done. Now, if I refresh this page and rerun the dashboard for Jane, it should say 0, or in this case, no data. There we go. And that's because she's now running this dashboard as herself. And because she doesn't have access to anything, she can't see, not all of the records being pulled are nothing. Whereas if I refresh this page, it'll say viewing as Harrison Thomas, and it will still be showing the 4. If I edit the way the dashboard is being viewed, and I'll go, let's view it as Jane, even though it's me, I'm going to view this dashboard as Jane, and then refresh. It'll say this, so I might need to come back in a minute. You can see there, 0. So that's one way where dashboards are kind of unique in that they can ignore, and they're not ignore because they're still using sharing settings, but you can apply specific users sharing settings to a dashboard that all other users who have access to that dashboard can then see. So that's a very useful way of letting people know, okay, how many cases have been resolved in the last month. They don't need to know the details of any of the cases. And indeed, if I'll change this report back to viewing as me, and then I'll refresh it for Jane. If Jane tries to actually look at this specific report of, oh, there's 4, and look at this specific report, when it loads, it will actually just say nothing, because again, she doesn't have access to those records. So there you go. So dashboards have this ability because they allow people at a very high level to see, at a summary level, to see like total numbers of cases being closed. They don't need to know the details of which cases are being closed. They only need to care about their cases. But that's a very useful tool you can use with dashboards. And in a similar way, you can also embed dashboards on Salesforce community sites and give people access to information that way as well. Let's say external users and even site guest users and so on. You can display information to them using dashboards that way. So do also be a bit careful with that though, just keep that in mind. So that kind of wraps it up for me in terms of what I wanted to go through. I'll hand it back over to you, Kel, if you had any closing remarks on the talking session.
Yeah, I am, well, when I sat the exam, I didn't know nearly as much detail as this. This is a compression of a lot of information to give you real world examples. What I've done, and I will just go back and share my screen. Now that we will just focus a little bit more on, so Harrison's provided a lot of background regarding how it's all used. I just want to give you a couple of tips for the exam. Are you sharing
your screen, Kel? Sorry.
I am trying to. It says that I am sharing.
Okay.
Oh, they now. Yep, cool. So I've added a couple of additional images to the website. So a couple of things that I want to say. So the reason, a couple of things that I remembered for the exam is that roles relate to records. So it was RR. Profiles are against objects. So excuse me while I need to. Oh, that's much better in mute to sneeze into the microphone or cough rather. So if you're looking at controlling objects, it's profiles. If you're looking at controlling records, it's roles. If you're looking at profiles and you need something a little bit more granular, it's permission sets, PP. So I worked out all of these mnemonics about how to remember and segment really quickly in the exam situation. Okay, I'm looking at objects. Okay, so I know it's, roles, records, and then record sets, yada, yada. That was one thing. The other thing is just understanding, and here are the two key images that I tried to understand. And if you click them, that will go straight to the Trailhead modules. So the order of thinking about security, that first one being the object. So does somebody want access to the object? If you're thinking about pay slips, do they actually need to see each individual pay slip? Then the next thing is field permission. Do you actually want to hide somebody's salary from their contact record or employee record or something like that? And then it's about thinking of, Harrison's mentioned about territories before, and the record splits are really about if you're separated by state, you only want to see the records in Western Australia, you can split it up by using splitting the records. So that's roles. So you would have a different role in the hierarchy for each of the states. And then that last one is, so it goes to org-wide defaults and then the rest. And when I say the rest, that's the second diagram. So the visibility opens up, the principles of, keeping things as secure as possible and then opening it up. So look at your org-wide defaults. It's the first thing that Harrison said. And, from me, if this was the first time that I saw it, I would actually want to watch this video, this recording, probably 2 or 3 times, because there's a lot of gems in there. And every time you'd see it, it kind of open up new things. Those org-wide defaults, think about it like contacts. Do you want to see, what does everybody want to see? And then narrow it down, narrow it down, narrow it down. They're the key points that I would have. And again, coming back to the exam, understanding how you are going to secure users as well regarding those IP settings, logging in by IP range, by time, making sure that they're super secure. There is a lot to cover in this section. There a lot of the questions will make sense though. If you understand the terminology, you will, and the concepts, you won't have too much of a problem implementing it and understanding that level of detail that Harrison has just shown you. It's not something that you pick up straight away. You will have to have practice. You'll have to learn, test, and go through those different stages. But you should be able to understand the concepts, understand that how you can, if you can't see an object, why? Where would you first look? And then the next stage, understanding the terminology. You should, this exam isn't so much about the implementation, it's about understanding the concepts. And I think we've covered everything that we need to in this. So Harrison, thank you very much, mate. Does anybody have any questions for the recording? Otherwise, I will stop the recording and see whether anybody has questions or to discuss afterwards. So thank you. Recording stopped. I think